Welcome to Health Facts with Normani Ricks. I am your host, Normani Ricks. I like to start each episode with an interesting health fact. Did you know that the original food pyramid was introduced in Sweden in 1974? The United States adopted a later version in 1992. The current food pyramid was introduced in 2002 by the World Health Organization and the Food and Drug Administration. We have a special guest on the show today, Dr. Tony Hampton. He is the diet doctor. He is a family medicine physician and obesity expert who has been practicing in Chicago for over 28 years. Welcome to the show, Dr. Tony Hampton.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited. And I have to say that I made a video about generational wealth, and I talked about the Illinois lottery because I'm in Chicago. And guess what year that started? 1974.
Okay, awesome. Look, we both
Yeah,
learning something today.
that's
That's
right.
good.
That's right. That's right. But I'm not encouraging that. If you watch the video on my YouTube channel, you'll see what I mean by that.
Okay, awesome. So, Dr. Hampton, what originally made you interested in being a doctor that deals with obesity?
Yeah, it was really, even before I started my journey focused on nutrition, I've always been interested in trying to help people with lifestyle changes. And it was clear to me that most people who suffer from chronic illnesses, they tend to have issues with their weight, not being able to achieve their ideal weight. So it just seemed to me logical that if I become better at managing obesity, I'll probably be able to help them with their blood pressure and their diabetes and their risk for heart attack or stroke. And that's what kind of got me moving down that path. What I did know at the time, though, was that understanding nutrition and lifestyle would be the foundation for me being a really good doctor. And it was really an eye-opening experience because we were trained to discover the diagnosis, and then figure out which medicine would work well or which procedure or surgery was needed for that particular diagnosis. We didn't really get trained very well to help people heal and to prevent disease and reverse disease. And in fact, we weren't even trained to believe reversing disease was really possible. So when I started focusing on obesity and then ultimately diabetes and other things, that's what kind of got me down that path. And once you see the light, you can't go back.
Awesome. So, talking about reversing diseases, I know one of the big things that people are talking about lately that can be reversed is diabetes. So,
Mhm.
can you inform the audience about insulin resistance and how it ties into diabetes and how eating can affect your insulin resistance?
Yeah, it's really amazing when you realize that elevated blood sugar is only a symptom. It's not really the disease. And what I mean by that is, it's just like any other infection. For example, if you have a cold or a strep throat, the symptom may be a fever. But if you don't get to that organism, that strep organism that's causing the disease with antibiotics, you're not going to really fix it. So diabetes is the same way. We focus on the blood sugar, which is a symptom. And because we focus on that symptom, we never get to the root cause, which is what you've just described, is insulin resistance. And all that means is that your ability to take the glucose from your diet into your blood and into the cells to serve as a source of fuel and energy is not working very well. So you're resistant. And the thing that's weird about it is that the more you make insulin, just like an alcoholic, the more resistant you become. Just like an alcoholic becomes more tolerant the more they drink, right?
Mhm.
So the solution shouldn't be adding more insulin, which is what we do with some of these medicines. Like as an example, glipizide or glyburide, those medicines tell your body to make more insulin. Um, and if you only, or you can take insulin itself, if you only focus on that, you'll find yourself chasing your tail because you'll only make it worse.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, insulin is the fat storage hormone, so it'll make you fatter. Insulin is something that it's a growth hormone, so it makes things grow, so it increases your risk for cancer. So we don't want to have too much
Wow, I
insulin.
didn't know. I didn't know
Yes,
insulin. I didn't know
yeah,
insulin could increase your risk of cancer.
yeah. Well, it's looking at it another way. Hyperinsulinemia, because you're insulin resistant. In other words, you're trying to make more insulin to get the job done, but it's not working, so you make more insulin. It leads to most of the chronic medical conditions we suffer from. So rather, we're talking about diabetes, hypertension, uh, cancer only uses glucose as its primary fuel.
Hmm.
And so if that's true, you could imagine if you eat starchy, sugary foods, and then and then you're giving it fuel, first of all, because you're eating the food fuel that it uses, and then you're making all this insulin, which helps it to grow, right? So it's like, it's really a disaster. Even dementia is called type 3 diabetes. So think about that. Yes.
You
So
are
even
dropping some knowledge. I
I'm
never
telling you.
heard that.
So think about it. So think about what you're saying. I haven't heard of that. Think about the fact that, I hate to say it, but some clinicians don't think about this way.
Mhm.
So we continue to try to treat diabetes with focusing on the symptom. We don't take advantage of insulin resistance, which is the issue. And so the most logical question somebody's asking, well, what do I do about that then, if that's the actual diagnosis? Well, you don't consume the things that require insulin. So for breakfast today, I had bacon, sausage, and eggs.
Mhm.
And some people would think that's a lot of fat and cholesterol in the doc. I said, well, yeah, it is actually, but that's okay, because those things don't really require a lot of insulin at all.
Hmm.
But if I ate, on the other hand, raisin bran, a banana, and orange juice, if you look at the labels, and a banana is going to be about 28 carbs. If you add those up, it's about 90 carbs. If you divide that by 4, you're getting somewhere around 18 teaspoons of sugar that you just consumed for breakfast. If you eat bacon, sausage, and eggs, you consume 0 carbs. So if you're a diabetic or a person trying to lose weight, it's probably more logical to consume the bacon, sausage, and eggs. And it's hard to, again, process this, because we've been taught for years and years and decades, really, that you need to eat fruits and vegetables and grains and all of that stuff.
Well,
And
a lot of
they,
people have
yeah,
Starbucks for breakfast, and that's a lot of sugar.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah, that's a great exercise. Like, people who are listening, first of all, save your money. Get you a little, kombucha cup or something at your office, or take it on the way home. But just do that experiment. Just go online. All the restaurants are required to share the nutrition data. So just look online and say, well, how much is in this latte, whatever, grande, whatever it's called, and you'll be shocked to find 50 or 60 carbs. And if you divide it by 4, it'll estimate the teaspoons of sugar. And we only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in our blood as we sit here and have this interview. So
hmm,
imagine a body that's only comfortable with 1 teaspoon of sugar, and then you dump 12, 15 teaspoons of sugar. So it has to go somewhere. If you have muscle, you worked out, you can throw it into your muscle and store it as glycogen. You can also store it as fat, which is what we don't want to do. Obviously, you can use some at the moment for energy. So you can do some things with that sugar, but for the most part, your body doesn't like all that sugar. So it's going to get rid of it in your urine, cause you to urinate. And if you do that too much, you can imagine why diabetes is the number 1 cause of kidney failure, because all that extra sugar
so
going
I'm
into your
glad
kidneys is
that
harmful.
yes, I'm glad that you talked about the kidney, because you talk about alcoholism, that's the liver. You talk
Mhm.
about the diabetes and insulin, that's the pancreas. And now we're getting to the kidneys. So just kind of talk about how food and nutrition plays a role in these internal organs breaking down.
Yeah, it's I'll give it. So I want everybody who watches this episode to look up the term metabolic syndrome, and I do have a column for the Diet Doctor, which is the number 1 low carb website. I write that every month, and but if you go to my YouTube channel, it'll say Metabolic Health Doc, and the reason why it says that is because most of the conditions we're talking about today, which are chronic illnesses, are based on metabolic syndrome, metabolic disease. So if we and hyperinsulinemia, which is what you started off with, is what leads to metabolic syndrome. So I'll just give you an example. I did mention things like diabetes, hypertension, dementia, cancer, heart attacks and strokes are all blood vessel diseases. So let's think about the blood pressure issue, for example. If I have issues with hyperinsulinemia, then I'm probably going to end up with a fatty liver, and a fatty liver will make too much uric acid. Most people think about uric acid for gout, but it's actually something that has other purposes. If your body makes too much of that, then you will then not make enough nitric oxide. It suppresses nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is the thing most people are aware of. You put it on your tongue if you're having a heart attack. You take aspirin, then you take nitroglycerin to open up your blood vessels. So imagine a fatty liver leading to less nitric oxide, so your blood vessels are going to be stiff, right? So indirectly, you could imagine hyperinsulinemia, too much sugar in your diet leading to too much insulin, can lead to hypertension. Another example, which is why it's all connected. If I have hyperinsulinemia, that actually leads to retention of salt in your kidneys. Okay.
Okay.
So if I retain salt, that's going to, wherever salt goes, water goes, and that's going to increase the volume of fluid in your arteries, which will then elevate your blood pressure.
Mm.
And so we focus on salt because people say, well, yeah, if I reduce my salt, I won't have hypertension. The reality is salt is actually your friend. Yeah, salt is not the root cause. The root cause was the sugar leading to hyperinsulinemia, leading to not enough nitric oxide or salt retention. And these are I'm just giving you two examples of how it's related to hypertension. So the real issue is, why can't we just deal with the root cause instead of worrying about salt? We should worry about starch and sugar and excessive grains, because the example I gave you was raisin bran. And most people, when they hear raisin bran, that sounds healthy, right? But
Yeah.
most people, yeah, it sounds healthy. But what all it is dried fruit, which is the grapes being dried to make raisins. And
Mhm.
it's also a highly refined grain. So you take something like wheat and you highly refine it. And so you have, really, it's a processed food. So you have a highly refined grain, you have raisins, and it's 38 carbs, which is the same number of carbs you find in most sodas or pops, depending on what neighborhood you're from. so,
What?
so think about that. So that's 9.5 divided by 4. 38 divided by 4 is 9.5 teaspoons of sugar. So when you start thinking, so most people say, man, I'm doing good, doc. I'm eating my raisin bran and my banana. They didn't realize that was essentially sugar to your body. So it's really, so again, that's just the hypertension question. When you start looking at other health conditions, you'll start to understand, like, for example, too much sugar in your blood is okay to an extent, right? So we need glucose for fuel, and I say sugar and glucose interchangeably. But imagine if you have so much in your body that your brain says that's too much. And the reason why your brain says that is because using glucose to make energy in the mitochondria, which is where we get our energy from in our cells, is a dirty process. In other words, there's a lot of byproducts that are created. So it's almost like working in a coal factory, right?
Mhm.
Where if you use ketones, which is taking fat from our body, like our belly fat, and turning that into, taking fat and turning it into ketones, is a form of energy as well. So what happens is your brain is like, oh my God, I have all of these byproducts being created in my brain. So I'm gonna take at the blood-brain barrier. I'm gonna just tell the glucose I can't take anymore. We're too full right now.
Mhm.
But you still need fuel. And if you have a diet that's not bacon, sausage, and eggs, instead of it's grits and toast and oatmeal, what happens is your body is not going to have the ketone fuel. So your brain starts to shrink. And if you think of your brain as having railroad tracks on it, and there are little wires that connect everything that make it work. Imagine if it's shrinking, that's going to really disrupt those railroad tracks, right? So
Mhm.
the signals that need to go from one place to the other, they're not going to work. And then all that inflammation is going to lead to what they call amyloid tangles and plaques. And all of that eventually leads to dementia. So what happens is, there are authors like Amy Berger, who wrote the Alzheimer's Antidote as an example. They teach people how to reduce starch and sugar as a way to help reverse dementia if it's early. Now, if it's too many tangles and plaques and the railroad tracks are just destroyed, there's a point when you can't really help people with dementia, although it still is valuable to have a diet that's stable, because up and down sugars is going to affect their behavior. So if you want a person with dementia to behave a certain way, it's probably best to still keep them on a diet that doesn't require these. It's just like Chinese food. You eat it because of the rice, it goes up, then it goes down. You're hungry, you're irritable, you want more Chinese food, So we want to eat food that's level
Mhm.
so that it doesn't lead to these and you wouldn't give a child food that's going to have them up and down. You wouldn't give
Right.
a person with dementia food. So it's always going to be a benefit no matter what. But the number of health conditions that are related to hyperinsulinemia probably is in the 30s, 40s. And they're most of the conditions that kill us. I mentioned heart disease. That's number one. 17 million people every single year die from, or should I say, have a heart attack in the world.
Mm.
Number two is probably cancer. Number three is probably stroke, but stroke and heart attacks are the same thing. It's just a blood vessel disease. And
Well, I
number,
think that a lot
yeah,
of people think that like hypertension and stroke is because of too much salt, right? But I think it's, you just said that sugar plays a worse role than salt. I know
yes,
back in the 70s and 80s, people used to give their kids salt pills and tell them to go outside and run around.
right.
But they don't do that anymore because
Yeah.
salt is considered bad.
It's actually
So,
good. We should be, if we ate the right diet, we would. I watch my wife's. I mentioned dementia because my father-in-law has dementia, so we're watching the Discovery Channel, right?
mhm.
And you'll see these goats like literally walking alongside of a mountain to the higher elevations to lick on the salt. Like what? So we
What?
need salt. Yes, it's crazy, but we we need salt just to survive.
Mhm.
However, going back to the this idea that hyperinsulinemia causes salt retention. If you reduce the salt in your, I mean, the starch in your diet, and you're not making all that insulin, guess what happens? You get rid of salt. So people on a diet that we're talking about, where you reduce starch and sugar, maybe a low carb, keto, things like that,
Mhm.
what happens is we have to add salt back. So now we are not afraid of fat because low carb, high fat diets are that way, and we have to add salt just to actually maintain our salt balance. So the food's going to taste great because we're not avoiding the two things they made us fear. Let me give you just another example of high blood pressure, because I think people really need to understand why it's a sugar problem. So and I always use this example. I've done this on other on my podcast, for example, the Protecting Your Nest podcast. So this is an example. So my house is my blood vessels, right?
Okay.
And if I'm in my house just eating sweet potato pie and I'm doing all the starchy sugar stuff, dressing, all these starchy sugary things, it's going to cause inflammation in my house. That's equivalent to my arteries. So I need something to protect my body, my house. So in this example, I'm going to say I need my cholesterol to tuck point my house, because the house is starting to crumble and we need to tuck point it. So LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol. I don't think there's a such thing because it's doing a good job when it protects me, right? And it's going to
Okay.
tuck point. The problem is mama keep giving me that sweet potato pie and I keep eating it, right? I just can't stop. It's like a drug, right?
Mhm.
So because it's so much inflammation, it's going to make me take that LDL and plaster my brick house. So now that's equivalent to clogging my arteries. And
Okay.
by the way, the HDL is the good cholesterol. And so while the LDL mortar is falling to the ground, it kind of takes it away. That's why we have a so-called good and bad cholesterol. I would argue there's no bad cholesterol if we eat the right food. Now, so that's an example of how we can get arteries that are clogged up. And I think it's important that people understand that there's also inflammation going on, and that inflammation is gonna we need to just stop that. And so and I think this example helps to illustrate that there's also the reason why people with high blood pressure actually end up with a heart attack. It's not just because the pressure is high, it's because you're clogging the arteries gradually over time from the inflammation. So the goal is understand the root cause of why we're ill, give those things attention. The good news is most of those things are lifestyle related. There's no
Right.
pill that's going to really give the impact that the lifestyle will.
Right.
And the good thing about the lifestyle is that the side effects are minimum. So it's really a gift to be able to share this with people and then have the faith in them that once they get the information that makes sense and it's evidence-based, then they're able to say, walk away. And then we say, so what's that one thing that we need to work on? And I know you're in, Atlanta, right? So it's the South. I went to school in New Orleans at Xavier.
Yeah.
Wife's from Mississippi, so I'm very Southern, oriented, and
Okay.
and things like sweet tea, for example, right?
Oh my goodness.
So yes, exactly. So, but nobody would consume sweet tea and think 9 or 10 teaspoons of sugar. They just don't think about it that way.
Mhm.
So what we do is we say, what's that one thing you're willing to give up between now and the next office visit? And what I do is I use that to say, well, and I let them decide. I say, I don't tell them sweet tea. I just say, what's that one thing? And then they'll say, you know what? I struggle with this, but I think I'd be willing to give that up. And then we start taking baby steps. And then I say, I want you to notice how you're feeling, right? So you may not, and I warn them that when you start changing your fuel from maybe, less carbs and more protein and fat, your body may have to adapt to that. So I'll give them warning. They're going to be losing some salt, magnesium, potassium. So I may tell them, get some keto chow electrolyte drops, or like cream of tartar has potassium, and you get magnesium citrate in the vitamin section. And I'll say, maybe you want to do these things temporarily while your body is adapting, so you won't get keto flu or carb withdrawal is another way I like to term it. And so you kind of prepare them, but most people just need to know what to expect. If they know what to expect, they won't say, I can't do this. They'll say, oh, Dr. Hampton said this would happen. And
Right.
then you go, and it's only like a couple of weeks. I didn't have any of it, but if you have some of it, a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden, like heavens open up and you feel better,
That's
mental
good.
clarity, energy, and you're like, I could have been doing this. You're not hungry. But it's
What
hard
are
to imagine that.
what are some good things that people can eat? I know avocados are healthy,
Yeah.
and those are considered like the good fats, and it has vitamins and minerals in it. But what are some other go-to foods that people can go to?
I wanna shock you if you're okay with that.
Okay.
Can I shock you?
Yes. You've been
uh,
shocking me this whole episode, so I'm just taking it all
yeah.
in.
I want you to start with animals.
Hmm.
Yeah, start with animals. I'm actually going to be in a documentary by Vinnie Tortorich. He made Fat, a documentary, part one, Fat 2, a documentary, and now he's making the it's about the Impossible Burger.
Okay. The
And
Impossible
so,
Burger, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
well, it depends.
Because it
Well,
seems like everything that I thought was good is bad.
yeah, it's put all plant-based burgers are not bad in and of themselves.
Okay.
What people want to think about is a plant, number one, it is a processed food. Let's start there. And I understand people who are plant-based want to enjoy the taste of what was once their, burger, right? But so if I have a plant-based product that is, you know, not, it's going to all be processed. So if I'm going to do that because I'm, on a run, I just want to get that taste. You want to get one that doesn't have a lot of additives in it. So
So
one of
look
the
at the back
things,
of the label.
yeah, look at the label. If you're going to see some stuff you can't pronounce, that's fair. That's just the nature of processed food. But
Okay.
there's something called leg hemoglobin in the Impossible Burger. And the problem with that is when they only did a 28-day research study on that particular uh, ingredient. And the problem is it did cause problems in the rats they did a study on. The other problem is they never did a study on humans. So what you want to do is you want to eat real food. So going back to your initial question, eat real food if you
Okay.
can. Avoid the things in boxes. But when it comes to nutrition, though, I mean, there's no essential carbohydrate to live. Essential means that can you live without ever eating this? And the
Mhm.
answer is carbs. You don't have to eat any. That's why Eskimos and some tribes in Africa, they don't eat any fruits and vegetables, and they're healthy. That's
Hmm.
the thing. So protein and fat is essential. Essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. There's no essential carbs. So I'm going to start with protein. Is probably the healthiest thing you could probably eat. Obviously, I don't want you to have cornmeal on it and flour and barbecue sauce, because Sweet Baby Ray. He
Sweet
got
baby
a
Ray's. That's
Sweet Baby
good. You know I'm
Ray.
from the South.
I know. But if you look at the label, because we're going back to labels, you're looking at ingredients that include number one, fructose corn syrup is the top ingredient. It's not tomato paste.
Yes.
You have pineapple juice. All juices are essentially sugar. So rather it's for your baby or you, juices are just sugar. They just squeeze the sugar out. So juices are to be avoided. They have molasses and they have actually sugar in it. So there's about 6 sources of sugar in Sweet Baby Ray. So essentially you're putting, so every 2 tablespoons is 4.5 teaspoons of sugar. And we know how much barbecue sauce in the South in particular that we consume. So what you want to do is stay away from those things on your animals. Now, a lot of people struggle with organ meats, but for those who can tolerate organ meats, that's probably the healthiest thing you can eat, but you just got to be able to tolerate it. And then when you,
Wait a minute, because a lot of people don't know what that means. So liver,
yes,
what are
yes.
organ meats?
Oh my God,
Let's
all of it.
explain this.
They have people that's eating brain and kidney and hearts and all kinds of stuff.
From the cow?
Yes, ma'am. There are people who eat, from the mouth to the anus, basically. And in some ways, you honor the animal better that way because you're not wasting any of it. So you eat the entire animal. I'm not suggesting that people have to go that far, but what I'm saying is for people who don't mind organ meats, or there are things like I have an order out by Aurelius Carnivore, and it's a liver chips. So there are things that you can purchase that can give you and the only ingredients are salt and liver, right? So it's not like it's processed, but not really, to the same extent. So what you want to do is eat real food, start with the animals because you're going to get your protein, which is really all you need for life. And then you can start thinking about the key for vegetables is non-starchy. So we know potatoes, grains like rice. We know pasta is just flour, right?
Right.
But we don't think about these things. We don't think about my mom's dressing. It's essentially bread, which is essentially flour. I saw how you smiled. We don't think about the spaghetti and the macaroni and cheese. It's essentially flour. It's not really food. So what we're trying to do is get away from processed foods, eat real food, maybe a zucchini noodle. Maybe you make your mac and cheese from cauliflower, which people would say is blasphemous until they try it. And when they realize noodles don't have a taste and the cauliflower don't have a taste, but you can use the heavy cream butter cheese or whatever fatty ingredients you use, it'll taste basically the same. It's just hard to envision that until you try it. So you start with the animals. When you go to the vegetables, you do non-starchy vegetables. And another blasphemous thing I'll say is fruit is nature's candy. So most fruit is nature's. I know we've been taught fruit. But if
Fruit
a
has a lot of
banana,
sugar in it.
it's sugar.
Yeah.
It's 20. If a banana, we just started with one thing, bananas. If that's 28 carbs divided by 4 is 7 teaspoons of sugar. Then what about the grapes and the watermelon and all these other things? Now, berries are not too bad. Green apples are not too bad. Of course, an avocado, we don't think about as a fruit. It's a fruit. It's probably the healthiest fruit on the planet because it's also fatty and it's a nice combination. So I think avocados is a great way to go. So, and I'll share with you if you have links. I do have a handout. One side, eat this, opposite side, don't eat so much of that. And so maybe we can share that. I have it on my on the Diet Doctor website on one of my pages, and they can use that as a guide because people are going to be very interested in starting the year with some changes. So I want
I
to give
think
them
a
some
lot
changes.
of it too is just we don't know because
Yeah,
we've been
yeah,
taught that this is good and this is bad and this is good and that is bad. But like
yeah.
after years and years of research, just like the wheat belly, that documentary came out. Everybody wanted to eat wheat and whole grains and all of that. But then they found out that was actually making them bloated. So
Yeah,
it's just a
it's
lot
not
of
logical.
misinformation out there.
I haven't even seen that documentary, but let's just pause for a moment and think about how ridiculous that statement is. And I don't blame people, and I don't blame the wheat belly people. It's just how could something be that critical for nutrition and we couldn't even consume it until the meals were invented? Now I could Google. I don't know what year meals were invented, but it wasn't going back 500 years, right? So
Mhm.
what did the previous generations do?
Right.
It's not lot, and you can't just go into the field and eat wheat. You have to process it. And for some people, and for many people, when they eat all of that, though, it's one of those things that are in that gluten category. And they call it glue because it just disrupts your digestive tract. So
No, I
again, it
haven't
doesn't,
heard
yeah,
that. So they call it
yeah,
gluten glue.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just
All
as it, and
right.
the way I look at it, it's like sludge. Just like as it goes through your intestinal tract, it's the sludge is causing a little damage as it goes through,
Mhm.
and that's creating problems. And I think it's important, and I know people say, well, we need fiber and things like that. Well, the lion don't seem to need fiber. The Eskimos don't seem to need fiber. And those tribes in Africa who don't eat fruits and vegetables don't seem to need fiber. That's an exaggerated truth too, because if you eat something, like if you take a steak and dissolve it in acid, it'll just disappear.
Mhm.
If you take a vegetable and dissolve it in acid, you'll be left with the fiber. So of course you got to get that out of your body,
Right.
right? So if I don't make a lot of waste, then it's okay to go to the bathroom 2 or 3 times a week as opposed to every day. This
Right.
idea that you have to, you have to have a bowel movement every day, all these things are not true based on science. And just understand this truth. A lot of the things you're going to be like, how do I know? I like what Dr. Hampton is saying. We're having a good conversation, right? But, Normani brought this guy to the podcast. But listen, how do you trust Dr. Hampton? And the best way to do it, and I'm not asking you guys to be scientists. I'm still in school I'm getting a master's in nutrition as we speak. You look for studies that said randomized controlled trials, meaning that the studies were done like an experiment.
Mhm.
Those are at the highest level of evidence that we have. Now, a lot of the studies that got us confused in the past were either, we call them observational studies. They're food frequency questionnaires. They would send Normally a survey to your house. You
Mhm.
fill out the survey, how many steaks did you eat last year? How many berries, right? And you send it back, and then they call that science. That's not science. It's
No.
all we had, so we didn't have a choice. Now we have randomized controlled trials. They also would look at the computer at the clinic and say, well, let's go back 6 months retrospectively and look and see what happened to people based on what they ate. Or we can do prospectively where we know we're going to follow these people and we go 6 months or a year. Those studies are also decent, but they're not randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trial means that I got low carb, you got low fat, and they fed us. They told us how we know exactly. We made sure I wasn't a smoker, a drinker, and all these other things that can make us sick.
Mhm.
So whenever you hear about a study on the news and they quote a study, look it up. And if it doesn't say randomized controlled trial, I would be cautious about trusting that data. Unfortunately, they're still doing those types of reports. And it's still, because I heard something about meat recently and I looked it up and it was like some observational study. I was like, come on, guys.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
it's a disaster. So that's why when you have documentaries like What the Health and others, it's very compelling. But if you really look at the studies that they're quoting, and they demonize meat, they're not the right studies. So if we didn't have those new studies, I would then have no choice. But we do have it, and I feel like a pretty healthy guy. And I'm not a carnivore, but I eat 80% of what I eat is animals, and
Okay.
uh, cholesterol is great. I did a heart scan, which looks at plaques in your arteries. The score was a 0, which is the best score you can get. Energy levels off the chain. Don't get hungry.
Well, you can't
It's
argue
just,
with that.
yeah,
You
it's
cannot
like,
argue with that.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's what's happening to my patients. I've taken 70 plus people off of insulin in the last few years. I mean, just imagine being told there was a young lady, Gwen Butler, who I did a YouTube video with.
Mhm.
And if they look that up, she got off insulin in like 30 to 40 days, was on insulin for 11 days.
Well,
So
how long was she on insulin?
11 years.
Oh
She
wow.
got off of it in 30 to 40 days. It's a dietary. And the only thing that made her change, and you'll see it in the video, is she decided to, she had a lucky, unfortunate incident. At work, she bumped her head.
Mhm.
She had to go, and that's only a few weeks after I saw her. She got a CT scan. It showed she had microvascular disease because, like I said, it's all the same stuff.
Mhm.
And she knew that that meant, oh my God, I'm either going to have a stroke, a mini stroke, or dementia one day. And she was just 52. So she took it
Wow.
seriously. She got all that starch and sugar out of her diet, and she got off insulin. In fact, she called me and she shares that in a video. She was afraid to stop her medicine. I was like, you can stop your medicine. She said, are you sure? I said, well, do it. She just stopped it that night. And I said, if you wake up and your sugars are okay, we're good. And she woke up and her sugars were like 90. So she was like, but she was afraid because she's been told for years. Just like everybody listening been told, you gotta eat your fruits and vegetables, gotta eat your fruits and vegetables, gotta eat your. I'm like, really?
Well,
Really?
we
Do I
learn
really have
something
to
new
do that?
every
Yeah.
day.
So again, I don't want, so if you're listening to this and you're a vegan or vegetarian, there's nothing wrong with that. I just want people to not do the standard American diet, processed food diet. And if your body feels good eating that way, do it. I was a vegetarian for 8 years. And somewhat of a vegan as well, but I found that the Brussels sprouts and the cabbage and a lot of those foods did not agree with me. And
Mhm.
I was able to understand that gas is more than just an inconvenience. It may mean that something's being irritated. And
Right.
although some people who really emphasize that or say, well, that's good because it challenges your body, they call it hormesis. Hormesis is good because it does challenge you and make you stronger. So the next, but if I'm always not feeling good when I eat something, that's not a logical thing to
You have to
eat to
pay
me.
attention to your body.
Listen to your body. And that's why
Yeah.
being a low carb or a low fatter is okay. Don't be a standard American dieter, if that's a word.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, Dr. Tony, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. You really, really dropped some knowledge on us, and we appreciate it. And we will take it all in. Thank you so, so much for being a guest. And we were honored and privileged to have you on our show today.
Thank you again. And guys, just be a continuous learner and always question who you're learning from. And as long as you're able to justify what they're saying, with whether you're watching a guy like me on YouTube, podcast, or whatever, just question everything.
That's right.
And then once you find your body's happy, go with it.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.